your Friday Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Hope you guys are having a good day, getting ready for the weekend, a little trick-or-treating in a few days, and maybe somebody's birthday that hosts this podcast. Not going to tell you exactly when, but it's coming up here in the next few days as well. So, if you're on the lookout for a gift, maybe go to the iTunes, go to the Apple Podcast, as the kids call it these days. Leave a rating, leave a review for your favorite daily delivery podcast, and maybe give me that for my birthday. Good show coming up today. Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune will join me here in a little bit to talk about the Vikings. A good free-flowing conversation with Ben about the defense, about Kirk Cousins, about some other things as the Vikings prepare to come off of that bye week. 5-1 right now, looking very good, but some things still that they need to clean up if they want to sustain their winning ways. So Ben and I will get into a lot of those things here in just a minute. We'll also get to the first big off-season move for your Minnesota Twins. They announced that on Thursday as well. First, though, what did I miss? Let's do a Friday lesson in small sample sizes. Wild start of the year, 0-3-1, 0-3 specifically, while allowing 20 goals. Marc-Andre Fleury gave up 11 goals in the first 4 periods he played this season. Did not look good, did not look sharp. Looked like the sky was falling, or at least a lot of pucks were falling into nets. And it was logical to wonder if this team was as good as they hoped they would be, if Marc-Andre Fleury still had much left in the tank at the end of a Hall of Fame career. These were fair questions after just how badly things had gone. It wasn't like they were losing games 3-2, 4-3. When you give up 20 goals in 3 games, it is fair to wonder what the master plan is. Since that 0-3 start, now I'm going to correct myself right away here. They won that 4th game, but then they had the overtime loss after that, so they were 1-3-1. But since the 0-3 start, 3-0-1, and they've given up, I believe, 10 goals in those 4 games now. Marc-Andre Fleury in net for all of those. Very good save percentage, very good goals against average during that span. Exact numbers were in Sarah McClellan's game story. In Friday's paper, 920 save percentage, 2.44 goals against average. Matt Zuccarello saying he's done it for 20 years now, so it's not surprising. And maybe that's a good lesson for us. Now, players age. It's natural for, players' abilities to wane a bit over time. And I think, Marc-Andre Fleury probably isn't the same goalie now that he was, 10 years ago. I think that's fair. I think athletes do, something goes in their game, but some things grow in their game as well. Larger point is Fleury and the Wild, we may have counted them out or at least sounded the alarm a little bit too soon. And now they're back to even 3-3-1. Really good road trip so far with 5 points in their first 3 games. Beat Ottawa 4-2 on Thursday night. Fleury very good, 27 saves. Great redirect goal from Kirill Kaprizov. A lot of good work overall from the Wild. Good, good tempo. Good, just another solid road game. And maybe hitting the road at that time after those struggles at home to start the year was a good thing for them. Go find their game. Take a little bit of the pressure off in front of the home crowd that was getting a little bit antsy, and just go play hockey. So that is your first lesson in small sample sizes. The Wild now back to even and feeling more like the team you thought they would be. Second piece, the Lakers. Speaking of somebody who's been around for 20 years, LeBron James. This is his 20th NBA season, which is hard for me to believe. I went and did a story on LeBron when he was, 18, when he was still in high school preparing to be what everybody imagined would be the number 1 overall pick in the draft. He's, had an amazing career, one of the 5 best players of all time. I can say that with confidence. But right now, with the Lakers in the twilight of his career, he's still playing at a high level, but his Lakers are awful. They come to Target Center tonight 0-4 after a struggle a season ago as well. And you've got LeBron and Anthony Davis on this team. And it's hard to fathom how they are so bad, but then you look at the rest of the supporting cast, and it's just not there. So I want to know, with the Lakers, who we all assumed would probably be better this season versus last year, but are off to this 0-4 start, is this sample size going to be reflective of how they're going to be the rest of the year, or are they going to figure it out at a certain point too? Now, you don't count out someone like LeBron or anybody like that at any point, because they're just too good. They're too, they're too experienced. We've seen them do too many things over the course of time. But that said, you also don't you don't take lightly what you've seen so far with your own eyes. So I'll be curious to see what happens in this game, what happens with the rest of this season for the Lakers and beyond. But beware, bigger picture, beware of those small sample sizes, because they will fool you into thinking you know something that you do not.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M, so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
All right, let's bring in Ben Goessling right now. Covers the Vikings, of course, for the Star Tribune. We do the Access Vikings podcast every Wednesday, and Ben generally joins me on Fridays during the NFL season to not so much look ahead or look back, but kind of like take a pause and kind of get a little perspective on where the Vikings are at. Obviously, they got to feel pretty good about being 5-1. They had a bye last week and still gained half a game in the division standings because Green Bay lost to Washington. That all said, Ben, I think a number of us have taken turns to a certain degree writing about, how did they get to 5-1? What parts of it are sustainable, winning on the margins, things like that. So I think they also realize there's stuff that they need to get better at if they are going to keep winning games and not just, relying on late game, execution, which has been a big part of what's gotten it done for them so far. And I think some of us would agree that one piece of things that could use a little bit of tightening up is sometimes their coverages on defense. So let's hear first from Kevin O'Connell and Ed Donatel this week. Just seems like a little bit of a difference of opinion. This had my ears perking up Wednesday when O'Connell said, essentially maybe Patrick Peterson should be deployed a little bit differently. So here's Kevin O'Connell first, and then Ed Donatel, defensive coordinator, a day later when told of what Kevin O'Connell had said.
He's handled it really well. I'd like to see him, and we're going to go ahead and greenlight him to maybe get up and be a little bit more competitive at the line of scrimmage, just because he's got that skill set and experience doing that. But what I think he's done a great job of, Ben, is using the experience of all those years playing against elite receivers and matching elite receivers.
I don't know exactly, which you might be referring to. But, we want our guys to challenge, and, deny the ball. And we want to cut down some of the gains people are making.
Now, Ben, what do you make of that? I don't think we're into schism territory or anything like that, but there does seem to be, to me, there a difference of maybe how aggressive maybe Kevin O'Connell wants to see at least some of the more trusted players on this defense playing versus some of the more patient schemes that Donatel seems to be deploying.
Yeah, it was an interesting point because I asked the question about, hey, Patrick Peterson has been this, he's been known as this, and that was a lot of the reason he said he wanted to come here is they'll allow me to be Patrick Peterson again, which is a press corner that's getting up on guys and turning and running with them. The Vikings obviously this year have done quite the opposite of that. I think it's been fairly successful for Peterson so far in the sense that he hasn't had to turn and run and has been able to kind of read things in zone and kind of key off of the things that he sees in coverage like he did at the end of that game against the Dolphins a couple of weeks ago. So it was interesting to hear O'Connell kind of say, we want to get back to some of the more physical coverage type things that he has done in the past. And I think O'Connell is looking at this and saying, how can we make individual adjustments within the scheme to tighten up some of the throwing lanes for quarterbacks just a little bit. Whereas I think Donatell is probably thinking we don't need to make a lot of adjustments to what we're doing because the philosophy of it has kept teams out of the end zone better than a lot of the yardage numbers would suggest that it would. And we should keep playing it the way that we're playing it. It was interesting because Donatell's response about, I don't know exactly what you might be referring to. You're kind of thinking, if O'Connell is telling us this, you would assume that they would have had that conversation behind the scenes at some point. It at least didn't sound like from Donatell's response that they had, or perhaps it was that they had, and Donatell didn't want to let anything on, or perhaps wasn't in total agreement with it. But yeah, the overall philosophy of needing to tighten things up a little bit in coverage and just make throwing windows a little more difficult to come by, I think is something to keep an eye on, because they have not done a great job of that. And you see a lot of teams, I think, kind of giving up the underneath gains in exchange for not giving up stuff downfield. But I think O'Connell is trying to say, is there a way we can do both of these things? Is there a way we can keep teams from pushing the ball over the top on us, but also make it harder for them to complete 10, 11-yard throws on 3rd and 7 and stay on the field, because you can get beat that way too. So interesting little thought process here with Patrick Peterson, and probably with their coverage in general. Certainly something to keep an eye on, especially as we see them get into a stretch in November where it's Josh Allen, and then it's Dak Prescott, and then the Patriots come in after that. I mean, that's kind of when that schedule starts to get a little bit more difficult for this defense, and it'll be interesting to see how they adjust to some of those things.
Yeah, it will be. And, old defensive-minded coach, young offensive-minded coach. We've never seen that play out here before in any way,
never.
shape, or form.
No, certainly not. And it's, we'll have to see how it plays out. Again, we have no historical precedent for it. But, I'm sure it could be an interesting exchange back and forth if you get into those types of scenarios.
Yeah, I would think so. I would imagine so. The difference in the Mike Zimmer era versus now is that the young... Oh,
that's what you were referring to.
The young offensive coach is the head coach now. Okay. But we'll see. I don't think...
But yeah, I guess that would maybe be something to keep in mind.
I think your assessment is a good one, in that maybe O'Connell is looking at this and saying, is there an adjustment to be made? Is there a tweak within the system? We're not saying overhaul the system. We're not saying this isn't working, because it's, they're 12th in scoring defense right now. It's not, not the end of the world in terms of how they're playing. People have been kind of dumping on the defense quite a lot this year, but by and large, that's kind of how they've wanted to play, has worked the way they want it to work, save for, I'm sure they don't want to give up as many yards as they are, but at the end of the day, they're content with, playing good red zone defense, trying to create some turnovers, getting off the field when they can, and trying to be steady that way instead of giving up big chunk plays. And by and large, they've been pretty successful at that. So I'm sure there will be a little bit of back and forth between how do you maintain what's been working well, even if people don't understand what's been working well, versus how do you get better within that framework, which is kind of what they're trying to do overall as a team right now, right? Just like, how do you take what's been working, but make it even better?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, to Donatell's credit, I guess, there have not been a ton of coverage busts, even when you have seen teams kind of trying to attack them in different ways, and teams trying to test how much young players are picking up the scheme. You saw the one in Philadelphia with the long throw to Quez Watkins. There haven't been a lot of other big downfield plays that have just been wide open. I mean, the Christian Watson one against the Packers might have been that if he'd caught the ball, but
right.
They counted themselves fortunate on that one. I think, we joke around about the Zimmer stuff a little bit. Also laugh when you said the word tweak, and then the Zim era there.
Yes.
But there is, in all seriousness, I think this is part of the relationship between an offensive head coach and the guy on the other side of the ball, I guess I should say the head coach and the guy on the other side of the ball, whether it's a defensive coach or an offensive coach, some of the theory is that you can have a little bit of that team of rivals thing where I bring my expertise on how I would attack you as an offensive coach or as a quarterback, like Kevin O'Connell was, or I bring my expertise of how I would try to defend you as a defensive coach, defensive play caller, like Mike Zimmer did it. I mean, that typically is how the exchange works. There can be tension at times if it's, hey, you should do it this way, rather than, hey, here's something to think about from the opposing perspective. Do it how you like. Just something to think about. But at the same time, when you're the head coach, you are the guy that has to answer for all of this stuff. So the exchange of ideas, I would expect this is going on in Green Bay right now with Matt LaFleur and Joe Barry. It's not uncommon. And I think these things can certainly have different tones based on the people involved. And I expect they do here as opposed to the way they've perhaps gone in the past. And we've seen some of those things not go so well in the past. So, it's probably some healthy tension involved there, but yeah, certainly worth keeping an eye on to see if it leads to changes or if it kind of just keeps going the way it's going and kind of how everybody handles that from there.
You wrote this week about some of how they've been winning on the margins. And I think Kevin O'Connell alluded to, I think Dalvin Cook alluded a little bit too on Wednesday to, they just they need to play better if they're going to keep winning. I think most of us would agree with that. They're not going to apologize for being 5-1, but I think if they don't count themselves fortunate, they should at least count themselves that they've executed at the right times and that might not always happen. One kind of glaring way this has played out is Kirk Cousins' season. I mean, he's statistically having one of the poorer seasons of his career when you look at a lot of the different numbers, but he's 5-1. He's played really well in the fourth quarters of games, made some really important plays, sometimes with his feet, but usually with his arm. And seems to me, just from a casual, not super casual, but, from a standpoint of someone who, gets out to access, several times a year, sees Cousins most weeks, he just seems different in his voice this year. And I wanted to get your opinion on that as how much you just see a different kind of, whether it's relaxed, whether it's more assertive, whatever it is. Kirk Cousins seems different to me as a person than he did a year ago. And not to belabor the whole relationship with the coach point, but it does seem like Kirk Cousins is different, yet it's not necessarily yet translating to big numbers on the field.
Yeah, I think all that is right. I mean, the numbers on the field have not been, and the interceptions, the couple of, I think he said 5 for the year. Yes. I mean, those have been the things that make the passer rating, to the extent that we still worry about that particular statistic, that has dropped passer rating. The completion percentage is probably not as high as it's been either. And I think there are certain plays where they are asking him to read it a little bit differently than it's been done in the past. And this also comes in the context of scoring and offensive productivity around the league being down in general. And there's been a lot of talk about that, both in the building this week in press conferences and just things written about it, of why that might be. And you've, I think, seen Cousins talked about it the other day, some of the schemes that are built on not giving up stuff over the top, kind of like we're talking about. And this is like what the Vikings run, where you have to sit there and be patient and hit timing throws and not just throw it over the top. They may have opportunities to do that on Sunday against Arizona, but I think that's been a little bit different overall. So some of the numbers probably worth keeping in context, some of those changes that have happened. But I do think the relationships in the building have allowed Cousins to be a little bit more of himself, probably, in press conferences. Because, I mean, remember, there were times when he would be fairly detailed after games about, here's what I should have done, here's what I wanted to do, here's why it didn't work, or here's why it did. And Mike Zimmer would say in his next press conference, he shouldn't be telling you guys that much. And right. Zimmer probably was telling Cousins that in so many words in private conversations as well. That doesn't seem to be, and there's a little more willingness from Cousins, from, I think, coaches to say, here's why this worked, and we can be a little more expansive on what we're doing. And almost, I think probably the idea being none of this is a secret.
Yeah.
And I think, Kevin O'Connell, I think likes to talk ball. I think that's part of it. He just likes to talk ball. And I think also sees a benefit in if fans understand what we're doing a little bit better, they might appreciate some of the nuance of it. That, that might work, that might not. If you're winning, it certainly works. But I think overall, there's probably less of a message of be extremely overly careful about what you say. So I think that has probably changed things a little bit for Cousins, because he typically has been a guy that when you ask him football questions, he will get into it and kind of tell you what he thinks. Because I think he's also a guy that just likes that exchange of ideas and thoughts. But he's had a little more space to do it. And I think probably too, he spent a lot of time in the crosshairs the last couple of years over, COVID, vaccines, all that stuff. And the fact that that's not coming up anymore, probably just it's human nature. I think it's going to have a little bit of a change in the tenor of those exchanges as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if O'Connell was a secret keeper, I don't think he would have blurted out that Patrick Peterson, like we said, will be playing more press coverage, or he'd like to see him playing up a little bit more in that. I don't think that's I don't think that's something you just volunteer if you're trying to keep everything close to the vest.
Yeah, he seems to subscribe to the crazy theory that what you say at a press conference does not cost you a chance to win a Super Bowl. And given the fact that he won one a year ago as an offensive coordinator, working for a coach that generally is fairly forthright with the media, he might be onto something. It's possible that you don't win championships with your press conference approach on a Wednesday. Crazy idea, but
might not be.
Do it.
Rams are kind of falling apart, by the way. Maybe Kevin O'Connell was the secret sauce over there.
It could be. That's very possible. But we'll find out here in the next few weeks. I would think if the Vikings go on to win the Super Bowl, maybe the theory kind of holds up there.
A few more thoughts for you. One being, we've talked a lot about the trade deadline that's coming up early next week. They still have this game before that against the Cardinals. Does this weekend's game to you have any bearing on what they might do or what they should do, like barring injury or anything like that? Let's just say, a win or a loss, what else happens in the division? Do you imagine that is something that should influence what they do? Because I'm sure people will say, we're always looking for opportunities to help the team, things like that. But if you win this game and you're 6-1, or if you lose and you're 5-2 and you identify some holes, things like that, it does seem to me like there can be a reason or, a tiebreaker is like, hey, this happened this weekend. We think we do need X, Y, or Z before the deadline. How do you see that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I suppose if you win, you could look at this either way, right? You could say, hey, we're 6-1. We have a great chance to be the number one seed. If Philly would trip up at some point, or at the very least, we have a great chance to win the division. Let's push some chips in the middle and take a swing at this. You could also say we're 6-1 and we haven't in a lot of cases played terribly well yet. I don't know what will happen on Sunday, but they've certainly said that after the first 5 wins. So we don't need to do anything because we have the pieces that have gotten us here, and we can keep going with those pieces. The answer to that may be different from different people in the building. I could see Kevin O'Connell having a different answer to that question than Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. I could see ownership having a different answer to that question. So I think it will come down to probably specifics about what scenarios are in front of you. What do you feel like you can do? And what do you have to give up to get it? Because I generally think there's not going to be, and we talked about it on Access Vikings, I don't think there's going to be a philosophy with this front office of let's just go trade everything and try to push everything we have into this season. I don't think they're going to do that. Frankly, they have to make a lot of things happen between now and Tuesday with the salary cap to do that anyway. And I think they can do a few things and try to figure out some ways to give themselves a little bit of room to work with and maybe make a deal or two if something is attractive. But I don't think there's going to be this wholesale sort of let's go find a way to get DJ Moore in here or a way to, make a trade for an established, corner or something like that. I mean, the different things you may talk about trying to do, I don't think they're going to mortgage the future for this year. That said, I think if there are opportunities to add to the roster, they're certainly going to look at doing that and try to do it probably in a way that doesn't force them to make huge leveraging type moves for the future in the process.
Trading away Alexander Mattison makes no sense to me. I don't know where that's coming from, but that just doesn't seem like something that you do when you're 5-1. O'Connell's talked really highly of Mattison at a couple points this season. He's had a couple, I think he took that, was it the 15-yard catch and run? And then he had another run early this year where, he was talking about, we're thinking that's going to be 3rd and goal. Next thing you know, he's in the end zone. So he's spoken pretty highly of Mattison this year, and Dalvin Cook's injury history, like none of that adds up to me.
Yeah. I mean, the thought process there, and I think where that's coming from is people talking to other teams around the league saying, yeah, they're calling. I mean, yes. And we know that there were calls about Alexander Mattison before the season as well, because everybody's looking at the same thing. They're saying this guy has been a productive NFL running back. He's at the end of his first contract. He's going to be a free agent after the year. Why wouldn't you try to get something now instead of losing him in free agency and then rolling the dice on? Is the contract big enough that we get a comp pick and we got to wait a year for that? I think that's probably where all that is coming from. It's just chatter among scouts, among front office people around the league saying, hey, there's a lot of interest in this guy. Yes, there is. That's been known. The thing to consider as well is the same thing to consider, was the same thing we had to consider before the season, in the sense that, like you're saying, he has value to this team now, given his productivity in the offense. They play him a lot on 3rd downs at this point with Dalvin Cook's shoulder and trying to keep some wear and tear off of that. Cook's injury history does make a difference here. And you've also had Ty Chandler injured, and they have not put Kene Nwangwu in the offense. So really, the only guy they have trusted beyond Dalvin Cook, or been able to count on beyond Dalvin Cook, is Alexander Mattison. I don't see a scenario where you're just going to suddenly deem him expendable unless you get some major return. And I don't think you're going to get a major return for a running back that's 6 months, 5 months, whatever it is, for free agency. So there's going to be interest, but if you're coming to the Vikings saying, here's a 5th round pick or a 4th rounder, I don't know that I see that being the thing they're going to do.
No, I agree with that.
Maybe you think about it for a 4th, but I don't think they're going to get a 4th. If they were 3-3 right now, it makes sense, but not at 5-1. Not when you think he's got more value to you than he does to probably a lot of other teams at this moment. Yeah, that's probably right.
Final thought, Ben. This feels like, I'm not saying Arizona is a quote unquote trap game, but it does feel like the kind of game where a classic Vikings team would stub its toe. The Vikings are favored in this game. They're home. They're 5-1. They're fresh coming off of a bye. Arizona, I mean, Kyler Murray, I know he's had his ups and downs, but and I know Call of Duty comes out today.
Yep.
We got all that. We talked about that on Access Vikings, but
we did.
This is still a potentially scary game. A team that, stumbled towards the end of last year, but was still a playoff team last year, right? And you've got a team where they're getting some guys. They got Robbie Anderson now. They're getting their kind of the wide receiver core back together now with Hopkins back as well. Like, this doesn't seem like a layup, even though it's a home game.
No, it's not a layup. I mean, I think that's been a team that's had trouble scoring, and then they go hang 45 on the Saints. I think it was 45. It was in the 40s a week ago. So yeah, the fact that you have a couple of proven receivers, Robbie Anderson, certainly a guy that will test you deep. DeAndre Hopkins has been one of the best in the league for a long time when they've had him. And you have Kyler Murray that's going to run around quite a bit as well. I think you're going to see Brian Asamoah probably try to spy him and be the answer there. Mark Craig's got some interesting stuff coming on Sunday about how Asamoah had played that role at Oklahoma the year Kyler Murray won the Heisman Trophy as his teammate. So kind of an interesting callback there to a role that Asamoah played for the Oklahoma scout team, I think, back in college. But so they're going to have to try to deal with Murray there. And I think you're going to have, as O'Connell talked about, they have 5 eligible receivers and Murray's running around. it limits the ways that you can play them. You're going to have guys cover, I think, fairly well on Sunday. This is going to probably be a little bit of a different test than this secondary has had. They haven't faced a ton of great quarterbacks yet that have really pushed them in terms of what they're able to do. I mean, you had the Dolphins with a pretty loaded offense. They didn't have their starting quarterback. You had the Eagles with a lot of talent, and that didn't go terribly well. So I think this is certainly a test for this defense. I think it's one the Vikings should win, especially being at home. But with the talent the Cardinals bring to it, it is, as we're talking about the coverage stuff, this is going to be a very, very interesting snapshot of how their defense will handle some of the things they're going to get tested with. Because you could make the case this is probably the best offense they have faced since the Philly game. And it's an indicator of what is coming in future weeks with Buffalo and Dallas, and then, kind of on from there.
Absolutely. Well, you and Andrew will be at the game on Sunday doing a Access Vikings podcast from that game. So be sure to listen to that. And Ben, we'll do this again next week.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
Really enjoyed that conversation with Ben Goessling. Like I said, follow all of his work, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. We'll see if there's anything. I'll be interested to see what adjustments are made coming out of the bye, just what they found as they kind of broke everything down, how they feel like they can get better, what they will try to do schematically versus internal improvement from players, learning, just getting a little bit more comfortable in the scheme, what changes and what they just hope evolves into something better. But I don't think this game's a layup. I don't think this game's a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination. I think the Cardinals will test them in ways that they haven't been tested for a while, and I will be eager to see how they respond to that. Let's finish with the cooler today. Like I said at the beginning, the Twins making their first big move of the offseason, hiring a new head athletic trainer, Nick Paparesta, coming from the A's. He was with the A's for the last 12 seasons as their head trainer. Very well respected, and this comes after they fired Michael Salazar at the end of this season after a lot of injuries this past year. So we'll see what difference this makes. I don't know how much stock should be put in this, how much this is, scapegoating's the wrong word, but how much this really was, a trainer's fault, how much of it is really just bad luck or just luck in general. But how much of this season, this 2023 season, how much better could it be if they just have reasonable health is a good question to ask, and an answer I imagine we will get, and they have taken at least a step towards trying to secure that in a meaningful way. That will do it for today. That'll do it for the week. Have a great weekend. We'll be back at it Monday with Patrick Royce and a whole bunch of other good stuff the rest of the week. I'm Michael Rand. See you then.